Cop disrespects black FBI agent. 2 minutes later, he's the one in handcuffs. He said, "I'm with the FBI." And the officer replied, "I don't care." 10 minutes later, guess who was in handcuffs? 642 Palm, Lakefield County, North Carolina. The sky was still bright, but the sun had begun hiding behind the treetops, casting a deep amber glow over the quiet 2-story homes. Children were still riding their bikes through tree-lined streets, sprinklers spinning over front lawns. And Damian Garcia, 36 years old, a veteran FBI agent, was simply trying to get home after a long day. His black Dodge Charger glided slowly through the neighborhood at 28 miles per hour. So quiet you could hear the soft hum of the AC and the steady roll of tires on asphalt. For the past 8 hours at the Charlotte field office, Damian hadn't drawn a gun, solved a thrilling case, or chased anyone down. Just stacks of paperwork, data analysis meetings, and interagency coordination reports. He was tired, didn't bother turning on the radio, didn't make a call. All he wanted was to get home to Gastonia, take a hot shower, and read bedtime stories with his 8-year-old daughter. And then, red-blue lights flashed behind him. No siren, no voice over the loudspeaker asking him to pull over. Just cold, blinking lights, suddenly slicing through the quiet of the evening like a cryptic omen, a warning of a storm without clouds. Damian sighed, flicked on his turn signal with his left hand, and slowly pulled over. This wasn't the first time he'd been stopped. But in a place like Lakefield, where most of the population was white and a black man driving a nice car might raise suspicion, things were never truly normal. He shut off the engine, rolled his window down halfway, and placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel. Clearly, slowly, every movement deliberate and calculated. He'd done this many times before, but it never got easier. Behind him, the patrol SUV rolled to a slow stop just inches from his bumper. A figure stepped out, stocky build, dark sunglasses, right hand hovering near the holster. No greeting, no introduction, no scanning the surroundings. He walked straight up as if Damian Garcia, a federal agent with 12 years of service, were a threat. The sun kept sinking, but the temperature on the street began to rise. And this was when the truth began to surface. Not from gunfire, but from attitudes that seemed invisible at first. And in the next 10 minutes, the entire town would learn. The person being targeted wasn't a criminal, but someone who wouldn't stay silent. An intense and gripping story is unfolding. To follow along, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our powerful, dramatic stories to come. Damian Garcia's Dodge Charger had barely come to a complete stop when the door of the patrol SUV behind him swung open. Out stepped a white officer, likely in his early 40s, short, stocky, with a shaved head and dark sunglasses, even though the sun was already dipping below the tree line. His right hand rested, not on his hip, but slightly off to the side, near the weapon concealed beneath his uniform fabric. Damian looked through the rearview mirror and exhaled slowly. He recognized that look. He had seen it on hundreds of case files at far more complex crime scenes. It was the look of someone not seeking truth, but seeking control. The officer stopped at the driver's side door, didn't bend down, didn't greet, didn't introduce himself. Just one question came through gritted teeth. "Do you live around here?" Damian didn't turn his head. He kept his eyes forward, both hands firmly placed on the steering wheel, voice steady. "Yes. I live in Gastonia. I'm about 15 minutes from home." Officer Charles tilted his head. "License and registration." "My wallet's on the passenger seat. Registration is in the glove compartment," Damian said. "I'll reach slowly, if that's okay with you." There was no reply, just silence and a scrutinizing stare. Damien moved, each motion slow, deliberate, a reflex now from practice. Open wallet, retrieve ID card, hold it above the dashboard. Then he leaned down, opened the glove box, pulled out the registration papers, and placed them neatly next to the ID. Everything visible. No sudden movements. "Here," he said, pushing the documents toward the window. But Officer Charles didn't take them. He just stood there, chin raised, and barked another question, sharper this time. "What are you sneaking around this neighborhood for?" someone called. Said a suspicious person was driving slowly, looking at homes. Damien blinked, raised his eyes to meet the officers for the first time. "I was going 28 miles per hour. No music. Not looking around. I'm just trying to get home." "Got anything in the car you shouldn't?" Charles asked, stepping half a pace back, hand still hovering near his belt. Damien didn't answer right away. He knew this type of question. It wasn't meant to inquire. It was meant to provoke. When he didn't react, Charles pressed on. "You're acting nervous. I'll ask again. Is there anything in this car I need to know about?" "I'm not nervous," Damien replied, eyes unblinking. "I'm just tired. I've been at work since 7 a.m. Step out of the vehicle." No more hesitation. No more pretense. Just a command. Damien tilted his head. "What's the reason?" "I gave you an order. Did you hear me?" Each word, every single one, carried a force Damien instantly recognized. This was no longer a routine traffic stop. This was a calculated confrontation. Damien inhaled deeply. And then, for the first time during the entire encounter, he said what he hoped would end it. "I'm a federal agent. FBI. My badge and ID are in my wallet right here." He slowly opened the wallet and held it up to the window. The gold-plated badge caught the last light of the day, reflecting onto the increasingly impatient face of Officer Charles. Damien kept his tone level and clear. "Damien Garcia, FBI Charlotte Field Office. I'm unarmed. I'm not resisting. I'm just trying to go home." But Charles didn't even glance at the badge. He leaned into the shoulder radio and spoke. "Male subject, possible impersonator claiming to be FBI, requesting backup. Need additional units on site." Damien closed his eyes for a brief moment, not out of fear, but because he knew a new chapter had just begun. And it wouldn't close easily. Damien Garcia kept his hands raised, eyes locked on Officer Charles. There was no fear inside him, only alertness, the kind of sharp clarity that had saved him more than once on mission fields. But this wasn't an organized crime takedown. This was just a quiet stretch of road in a peaceful neighborhood in Lakefield County, North Carolina. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Charles's voice left no room for negotiation. Damien still tried to remain calm. "I showed you my badge. I've presented my FBI credentials. I'm unarmed. I'm not resisting. I'm just—" "Did I stutter?" Charles interrupted, stepping closer, chest puffed in menace. "I said get out of the car. I don't care who you are. You don't belong here." That final sentence carried weight. Not a comment about behavior, but about existence, about skin color, about a narrow-minded view shaped by arrogance and prejudice. Damien exhaled. He knew encounters like this weren't about reason. They were tests to see who would cross the line first. He opened the door, slowly, stepped out, hand still raised, cooperative in motion, but never in spirit. "I'm complying," he said, voice deep and firm. "I am Special Agent Damien Garcia, FBI. You're in violation of protocol by ignoring my identification." Charles didn't back off. He stepped in and abruptly shoved Damien's left shoulder, not enough to knock him down, just enough to demean. "Are you threatening me?" Damien asked, voice not raised, but sharp as a scalpel. "No," Charles sneered. I'm teaching you that badge doesn't get you special treatment here. He grabbed Damien's arm, spun him around, and locked a cuff on his right wrist. The cold metal pressed against his skin, tight, unnecessarily so. Neighbors started to notice. A woman stopped watering her lawn. An elderly man with a dog froze in place. A teenager, maybe 16, stood on a front porch, lifting a phone to record. No one said a word, but their eyes began to change. Damien remained upright, raising his free hand to avoid any misunderstanding. I'm a federal agent, he repeated, louder now, for the entire street to hear. I've broken no laws. I presented my ID. I was denied lawful inspection. I'm being unlawfully detained. Keep talking, Charles growled. I'll let you ramble in the back of the patrol car. Just then, Charles's radio crackled. Unit 3, backup en route. ETA, 2 minutes. Charles shoved Damien against the hood. The second cuff clicked onto his left wrist. The handcuff screeched a sharp metallic note, like the shattering of a principle underfoot. Damien didn't resist. Not because he submitted, but because he knew the truth takes time to rise. And this time, it would be captured from multiple angles, by both human eyes and phone lenses. Charles leaned close, whispering into his ear. You could be FBI, CIA, or even a senator. Out here, I'm the law. Damien turned his head, met his eyes. The law doesn't belong to the one who wears the cuffs. It belongs to the one who respects it. At that moment, engines roared in the distance. The flashing lights of 2 other patrol cars began to crest the corner ahead. Backup had arrived, but not to support Charles, rather, to witness the abuse of power he never expected would be surrounded from all sides. The cold steel cuffs tightened around Damien Garcia's wrists like a declaration of injustice. The federal agent didn't resist, didn't rage. He simply stared at Officer Charles, his gaze not weak but resolute, carrying the weight of 1,000 quiet endurances. You're making a mistake, Damien said, voice steady and low, a warning that didn't need to be shouted. But Charles, in his 40s, square-jawed, eyes burning with a twisted sense of authority, didn't budge. He spoke into his radio. Male, black, suspected impersonation, requesting backup. Not a single word about the FBI badge, not a single glance at the ID. Damien wasn't surprised. He'd seen it happen, to colleagues, to civilians, but never imagined that today, dressed in plain clothes, holding a federal ID, he'd become the target. At the end of the street, the golden glow of the late afternoon quietly stretched across the lawns. A woman, mid-spray with her garden hose, froze, water pooling at her feet, forgetting to turn the tap. A few feet away, a teenage boy, David, a high schooler, silently raised his phone. No one had to teach him to do it, but in a country where police can sometimes mean fear, the instinct for a person of color is record. Don't stay silent. Damien spoke louder, clear enough for anyone nearby to hear. I'm a federal agent. I'm not resisting. I'm unarmed. This is an unlawful detention. This is being recorded. His voice didn't tremble. His face held no anger. But his hands, now cuffed behind him, were turning a deep red from the pressure of the restraints. Shut your mouth, Charles growled. But the only sounds now didn't come from Damien. They came from phones recording. At least 4 people stood across the street, some calling, others live streaming. This was no longer a traffic stop. It was a silent trial, where justice didn't wear a uniform, but stared through open lenses. And as the second patrol car turned onto the street, blue and red lights casting flickers against white fences, Damien knew. The moment of reckoning was near. He looked down at his hands, red marks etched deeply, then closed his eyes and took a slow breath. This wasn't just about one black man being wrongfully arrested. This was about justice, about the system. And the system, crooked as it may be, was being forced to watch. Exactly 2 minutes and 12 seconds after Charles called for backup, the second patrol SUV turned onto Magnolia Ridge Road, its tires softly scraping against the warm asphalt. The blue and red LED lights still flashed, casting reflections across the front porches of colonial-style homes as the evening sun slowly dipped behind the neighborhood tree line. The car door opened. Lieutenant Ava Miller stepped out. She wasn't tall, just around 5 feet 5 inches, but every step she took cut through the air. Her uniform was crisp, the command insignia pinned over her left chest, and her dark brown hair neatly tied back in a style worn only by those who've been on the scene 1,000 times and know exactly when things go beyond a routine stop. Her eyes swept the scene. In front of her stood a black man, athletic build, strangely composed, with his hands cuffed behind him, silent beside a registered Dodge Charger. Facing him was Charles, shoulders tensed, eyes flickering with a mix of defiance and unease, one hand still hovering dangerously close to his weapon, though there was clearly no threat of violence. Ava saw the FBI badge resting awkwardly on the roof of the car, catching the dimming sunset light. She didn't need anyone to explain. No algorithm, no radio transcript, just 5 seconds. Instinct told her exactly what had happened. "Status?" Ava asked, voice low and cool. Charles stiffened as if to attention, but couldn't hide the edge in his breathing. Subject was acting suspicious, driving slowly in a residential area, refused to exit the vehicle, claimed to be FBI. I followed protocol. Ava no longer looked at Charles. She stepped toward the man in cuffs. Her eyes paused on the ID badge, then looked him square in the face. "Agent Damian Garcia." Her tone shifted, this time with recognition. Damian gave a small nod. "Charlotte Field Office. I presented ID, informed him I'm a federal agent. He didn't bother to look." Ava lifted the badge. Under the fading daylight, the gold-emblazoned FBI credentials gleamed, a living, indisputable piece of proof. She paused a beat, then turned, locking eyes with Charles. "You handcuffed a federal agent?" The question didn't need volume. Every word struck like a gavel in a courtroom. "He had an uncooperative attitude," Charles stammered. Ava cut him off. "Attitude? Did you check the ID?" Charles faltered. "I saw it, but did you run it through the system?" "No, I thought, that's your problem." Ava delivered the line like law, not angry, just absolute. She turned to the young officer beside her. "Wilson, uncuff him. Now." Officer Isla Wilson, a young female cop, stepped forward, hesitation in her eyes. But Ava's firm nod was enough to move her into action. The cuffs were unlocked. Damian rubbed his wrists. The deep red marks were clear, the evidence of a mistake no apology could erase. Ava spoke quietly, just enough for Damian and those nearby to hear. "I'm sorry, Agent Garcia. This is not our protocol." Damian didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at her, not with rage, not with resentment, but with the steady gaze of someone who'd seen too much, and this time had become the witness himself. "The thing is," he said, "I'm not surprised." No explanation was needed. Ava nodded. In that moment, two people from different agencies, different backgrounds, stood in a space where power had been abused and understood that some wounds don't need blades to cut deep. The phone's recording was still rolling. David, the teenager, stood silently across the street. He was witnessing something rare, someone stepping up. And the truth, no longer shoved beneath a patrol car, was standing tall in plain sight. In the dimming light of sunset, Lieutenant Ava Miller picked up Damian's badge. The FBI identification card, neatly placed on the roof of the Dodge Charger. Her fingers flipped it open, her eyes scanning each line. Special Agent Damian Garcia, Charlotte Field Office. She looked up, locking eyes with the man in front of her, who was still rubbing his wrist, where a deep red mark remained. Agent Damian Garcia? Yes, Damian replied, his voice low but firm. Ava took a deep breath, then fully turned toward Officer Charles, who now stood frozen, sweat dripping down his temple, as if only just realizing the situation had turned dramatically against him. You just cuffed a federal agent? Her voice was now sharp as forged steel, leaving no room for leniency. Charles stammered. He was acting strange, not following orders. I thought he was impersonating. Ava cut him off. No attempt to hide her anger. Strange how? He presented his credentials, clearly stated his position, acted with caution, carried no weapon, and offered no resistance. And you still thought that was enough justification for handcuffs? Charles mumbled, but had no answer. You didn't verify through the system. You didn't look at the badge. You didn't ask a single follow-up question to confirm his identity. And now you're fabricating a flimsy excuse to cover up a wrongful act. Ava held the badge high for everyone watching, the woman still standing by her running hose, the man walking his dog while recording, and most of all, the boy David, who hadn't taken his phone down since it all began. This is not a fake ID. This is the badge of a federal agent, either currently on duty or just completing it. And you, Officer Charles, chose to ignore every protocol we swore to uphold when we put on this badge. A heavy silence settled over the neighborhood. Damian remained still, his hands now free, but his expression had not softened. He did not shout, did not rage, did not push. But his eyes, they were a full indictment. Ava stepped forward again, without turning back. Isla, give me Charles's body cam footage, immediately. Young Officer Isla Wilson nodded and moved toward Charles's cruiser. Charles started to open his mouth to speak, but Ava raised a hand to cut him off again. Silence is your smartest option right now. Lieutenant Ava Miller stood tall at the intersection of Lakefield's residential neighborhood, body cam in hand, her face expressionless. We'll watch it from the beginning, she said, then pressed play. Everyone around fell silent. The first sounds were the hum of a slow-moving engine, and Damian's voice. I live nearby. His voice was calm, steady, with not a trace of panic. The footage showed him explaining that his wallet was on the passenger seat, the registration in the glove compartment, and that he would retrieve them slowly. Everything followed protocol. No sudden movements, no resistance. Then the image shifted. Damian held up his FBI badge. I'm a federal agent. This is my ID. Next came Charles's voice, amplified with chilling clarity. I don't care who you are. Out of the car. Now. No explanation. No verification. Not a shred of professionalism. Just power being misused. Ava said nothing, but her expression made it clear to everyone. The truth was revealing itself, without argument, without bias. Each passing second on the video was living evidence. Charles had failed to perform any identity check required by regulation. He ignored the ID, dismissed warnings, and proceeded to cuff a man he had no legal grounds to arrest. The most shocking detail, the moment Charles forcefully shoved Damian's shoulder while cuffing him, an unnecessary act that screamed hostility and lack of control. Do you see it now? Ava asked softly. But her gaze cut like a blade. Charles remained silent. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. This is no longer about I think, or I felt suspicious, Ava said. This is footage. This is audio. This is a protocol blatantly ignored. And now, this is a consequence. A young girl nearby, perhaps 10 years old, sat on a front step, eyes fixed on the small screen. A father held his child beside a car, his grip tightening around the backpack strap. David, the teenage boy with the phone, kept recording steadily. All of them. Witnessing how justice works when evidence leaves no doubt. Ava turned to Isla Wilson. "Back up this footage. 1 copy to the sheriff's office, 1 to the FBI. And I want a copy archived on the county server before 8 p.m. tonight." "Understood, Lieutenant." Charles stepped half a pace back, as if cornered. He had nothing left to say, and no words could excuse what had been done. Damien still stood quietly, gently rubbing his left wrist, where the handcuffs had left their mark. But his eyes never left the screen, as if he too was watching his own story unfold. Ava turned to Damien. "Do you have anything to add?" He shook his head, then spoke slowly. "I don't need an apology. I need transparency. I need the system to show that it still knows how to correct itself." Ava nodded, and tonight, at least a part of it did. She turned away, though her eyes lingered on Charles. No further indictment was needed, because sometimes evidence doesn't just convict, it redefines who truly holds power. This was no longer an argument, it was a battle of proof, and Charles, while clearly, had lost. Damien Garcia stood in the middle of the quiet street in Lakefield's residential neighborhood, where the last light of day had just faded. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, but the air remained heavy, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for something to be said. The body cam had stopped playing, but the phones had not. From every angle, front porches, sidewalks, second-story windows, lenses stayed fixed on the man in plain clothes, but bearing the gleaming badge of an FBI special agent. Damien took a deep breath. Though his wrist still bore the marks of steel cuffs, his posture stood firm like a monument. He stepped onto a nearby stoop, where young David was standing, then turned to face the gathering crowd. No microphone, no rehearsed speech, just the truth. "I'm Damien Garcia, federal agent, assigned to the Charlotte field office of the FBI." Ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. A few adults reached to steady their children's shoulders, as if to say, "Listen closely. I was just handcuffed on the street of a neighborhood I've lived in for 12 years. His voice was not loud, but it rang clear. Not angry, but weighty. "I didn't break any traffic laws. I wasn't armed. I followed every protocol, rolled down my window, kept my hands on the wheel, explained everything." He paused, his eyes scanning every face watching him. "But I was still suspected, still ordered out of the car, still pushed, cuffed, and treated as a threat. Not because of my actions, but because of prejudice." A woman covered her mouth. A man furrowed his brow and looked at his wife. David, still holding his phone, didn't blink. "I'm not standing here asking for sympathy. I'm standing here to warn." The air froze. Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be your husband, your brother, someone's son. A chill swept through the crowd, not from cold, but from truth laid bare. No one is exempt from the consequences of an officer's recklessness, until we demand accountability. At that moment, Lieutenant Ava Miller stepped beside Damien. She didn't speak. She just nodded, a silent affirmation. Damien continued. "I'm not asking anyone to be angry. I'm asking everyone to remember. Remember what happened. Remember how easily a truth ignored can become a serious mistake." The teenager David stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I got it all, sir." Damien nodded, his expression softening. "Keep it safe, not just for me, but for yourself." He turned to Ava. "I'll file my report through FBI channels. But first, I want the people here to know. I won't stay silent. And I hope they won't either." A wave of applause followed, not loud or raucous, but deep and steady, like the sound of a long silenced heart beginning to beat. That night, the video David recorded spread across social media. Instagram, X, Facebook. Hashtags like Agent Garcia and Justice in Lakefield began trending. In just 6 hours, the clip amassed over 1.2 million views, shared by civil rights groups and national news outlets alike. But it wasn't the numbers that mattered. It was the image of a black man, wrists freshly freed from steel, still standing in the street, reminding America that silence is never the choice of those who want to change the system. And Damian Garcia had just begun writing the first chapter of a conversation no one could ignore anymore. Lieutenant Ava Miller wasn't going to let this pass like all the other times, like the hundreds of cases where an apology was the only conclusion. This time, there would be action. She took a step toward Officer Charles, her voice firm and cutting through the silence of the street. Officer Isla Wilson, proceed with the arrest of Officer Charles per protocol. Violation of traffic stop procedure, failure to verify identification, and unjustified use of force against a federal agent. No one breathed. The entire street felt stretched taut by those words. Charles froze, his face flushed red, his lips parted in disbelief. Wait, Lieutenant Miller, you can't do this. I was just acting on instinct. Ava turned to face him, her eyes devoid of any sympathy. You are not the law, and you just proved why you should never represent it. When Damian Garcia held up his badge, you didn't look. When he spoke, you didn't listen. But when this community witnessed everything, I acted. Isla Wilson stepped forward, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. But when she saw the red marks on Damian's wrists, she didn't waver. You have the right to remain silent, Isla said as she clasped the steel cuffs onto Charles's wrists. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The handcuffs snapped shut with a clear click, a familiar sound, but this time meant for someone who believed he was always above the law. Charles stepped back, hands locked behind him. His voice stammered. You'll all regret this. Ava Miller didn't reply. She simply glanced at Damian. This isn't personal. This is justice. Damian gave a small nod, not bitter, not vindictive. Just a nod that said, at last, the day has come. Murmurs rose among the gathered neighbors. A few claps echoed, not for Charles's humiliation, but because the truth had been acknowledged, and this time, the system didn't look away. Damian turned to David, the teenager still holding his phone, and said quietly, "Keep that video safe, not just for me, for you, for next time." David swallowed hard, nodding firmly. "I understand." The patrol car drove off, taking with it an officer, not, as usual, arresting the innocent, but one who had abused his power. David, a skinny teenage boy with wide, watchful eyes, stepped forward just as the SUV carrying Officer Charles turned the corner and disappeared behind the row of houses. In his hand was his iPhone 12, the screen still displaying the video he had recorded just 15 minutes earlier. The evening breeze stirred his messy curls, but his hand did not tremble. "I got it all. From the beginning," David said, his voice quiet but steady. Damian turned to him, looking directly into the boy's eyes as if seeing his younger self from 20 years ago, when he, too, had silently witnessed injustice without knowing what to do. He placed a hand on David's shoulder, not heavy, but firm enough to pass on the weight of trust. "Keep that video, David. Not just for me, but for yourself. One day, you might need it to protect someone, maybe a friend, maybe even yourself." David swallowed and nodded. "I'll keep it." Just a few hours later, the clip was uploaded to TikTok. No clickbait caption, just one simple line. uncle got cuffed just 'cause his skin wasn't the same color as that cop's. 2 hours later, 38,000 views. 5 hours, 412,000. By the next morning, it had passed 1.2 million. On Twitter, X, the phrase FBI agent in cuffs shot to the top 3 trending topics. Hashtags like hashtag justice for Damien, hashtag accountability now, and hashtag power misused spread at alarming speed. People began digging into Officer Charles's history and uncovered that he had received 2 prior complaints in 2021 for excessive conduct during nighttime stops. But for Damien Garcia, social media wasn't the victory. To him, it was only the beginning. The next morning, at the small kitchen table in his modest Gastonia apartment, Damien opened his laptop. His inbox had over 60 emails, 3 from other FBI field offices, 1 from the head of the Southeast Division of the Department of Justice, and 1 from Internal Affairs with the subject line, "Footage request fulfilled, time-stamped and archived." Damien clicked to open the clip, this time from Ava Miller's body cam, a different angle, a perspective that proved his composure hadn't been luck. It was a choice made within a system where errors were rarely forgiven. He rewatched the moment he said, "I don't want an apology, I want accountability." And he knew. It hadn't come yet, but it was getting closer. By the end of the day, Ava Miller called him. Her voice still carried that firm resolve, but now with a hint of respect. "We're launching an internal investigation, both into individual conduct and our district's patrol model, and possibly everything that's been ignored in Charles's record." Damien didn't speak for 5 seconds. Then he exhaled. "Thank you, Lieutenant. But I need one more thing." "What's that?" "I want to meet David, and if possible, I want to thank him the right way. Because maybe the person who saved Damien that night wasn't just the law, or even Ava Miller. It was a boy who didn't stop recording, a silent witness who is now shaking the whole system." The next morning, 7:14 a.m., Gastonia. The faint morning light slipped through the kitchen window, casting a soft glow on the worn wooden table. Damien Garcia sat still, holding a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream, the only kind he drank after sleepless nights. Not because he had just won a battle, but because, for the first time in years, he hadn't let silence define justice. On his laptop screen, a 3-page formal complaint had been submitted. A clear, comprehensive account with attached footage from 3 different angles: Lieutenant Ava Miller's body cam, Officer Isla Wilson's body cam, and David's, the 16-year-old boy with the iPhone 12 who had recorded the pivotal moment. Subject line of the email: formal complaint, violation of federal protocol and civil rights. Officer Charles, Lakefield PD. Sent to 3 places: the FBI, Charlotte Field Office Director, Lakefield PD's Internal Affairs Division, and the U.S. Department of Justice, Eastern Region Office. After sending, he hit print and clipped a hard copy to be mailed to a civil rights law office in Durham, where he had once co-hosted a seminar on constitutional rights 2 years prior. At 8:02 a.m., Ava Miller texted, "Video has been sent to the DOJ. I'm preparing internal investigation files, including the 2 prior complaints against Charles that the department ignored." And one more line, cold and sharp. Justice should not be slow, and yesterday at least it wasn't. By 11:30 a.m., an emergency meeting was held at Lakefield PD headquarters. It was no longer an internal matter. Local news station WNCN Carolina Now had obtained a copy of the footage and was already running the headline, "FBI agent wrongfully handcuffed. Officer faces possible criminal charges." At the follow-up press conference, Ava Miller didn't dodge the media. She stated clearly, No one is above the law. Not civilians, not officers. When a man is pulled over because of his skin color and handcuffed even after showing federal ID, it stops being a personal mistake. It becomes a systemic one. A reporter asked, "What disciplinary action will Officer Charles face?" Ava responded, "He's been stripped of his badge, placed on suspension, and is facing at least 3 charges. Unlawful detention, violation of federal civil rights, and unnecessary use of force." That afternoon, David, the teen who had filmed everything, appeared in a statewide student-organized livestream on social justice. He only said one thing: "I don't think I'm a hero, I just hit record. But maybe if more people hit record, the world wouldn't stay so silent." Damien watched that statement without blinking. Then he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and left the apartment. He didn't go far, just to the FBI Charlotte office. Not to request leave or file more paperwork, but to propose an idea: a mandatory training session for all new state officers on recognizing civil rights and practicing non-violent communication. And if approved, he would volunteer to teach it. Not as a victim, but as a survivor who knew how to turn anger into action. That evening, as the streetlights reflected across his windshield, Damien drove the same black Dodge Charger down the same old road. The cuff marks on his wrist had faded slightly, but they weren't the end. They were the beginning. Justice isn't an apology behind closed doors. It isn't a few lines in a formal statement. Justice is action, documented, verified, and multiplied. For everyone. Everywhere. And that night, in a quiet corner of Lakefield County, justice had begun to walk. Not with a gun, not with a shout, but with a video, an unbowed gaze, and a black man who dared to say, "I will not stay silent," as Damien left that street, not with anger, but with belief. Belief that if justice isn't handed to us, it must be demanded. But what do you think? Can one video, one voice, one person standing up truly change an entire system? Or is it just an echo in the silence? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice is also part of the change. This is Black Strength Stories, where truth speaks loudest. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the powerful stories still to come.